Rainfall can be a curse or a blessing. Obviously, too much rainfall can cause flooding, but in places like Nevada, Arizona, and California, it can put an end to a long and deadly drought. This was the feeling of people in Northwestern Nevada in 1992 when the dry season ended and the rains started to fall. As fall turned into winter, the cold weather turned the rain to snow. Most people enjoy an occasional snowfall, being able to play and have fun. Sometimes, though, the snow ends playtime permanently. James and Jennifer Stolpa were already prepared for a difficult week leading up to New Year's in December of 1992. After all, a family funeral is a hard thing to deal with at the best of times, and it's only that much harder when it comes during the holiday season. Unbeknownst to them at the time, though, that would end up being the least of their problems because by the point the new year fell, it would be their lives on the line instead. The California-Nevada border is, perhaps unsurprisingly, a place that doesn't see a lot of rain. But then given the desert conditions of much of the area, that's only to be expected. While that can lead to a lot of good weather for those living there, it can also cause major issues that often come in the form of severe droughts. In November of 1992, after years of having none, water finally started to fall and it was deemed to be something of a blessing from the heavens for the locals. What made it all the better was that it wasn't just a little downpour. No, this was a full-scale onslaught of cold fronts creating not only rainfall, but also snow and heavy winds too. Sure, that would come with its own set of problems as it caused major disruptions to air, rail, and road travel, but if it meant there was no more drought to worry about, then it was a small price to pay. As it happened, one of the places that was hit hardest by these new weather conditions would be the northern border of California and Nevada. That was significant because it would be the passage that James, Jennifer, and their infant son Clayton would soon have to travel through, despite warnings from meteorologists advising against it. Of course, under normal circumstances, they may have heeded those warnings and chosen to stay at home instead, but given that they had a funeral to attend, they felt they had no choice but to try and brave the elements anyway. The death of James's grandmother meant they felt compelled to be in Idaho in time for the funeral, no matter how difficult a journey they had getting there. And given the disruptions to rail and air travel that were causing chaos all throughout the border area, leading to 80% of flights being canceled, the only option they had left was to pack up and travel there by car. It wasn't as if James was a stranger to dealing with challenging situations anyway. No, he was more than capable in this area. After all, as a Marine private and satellite equipment repairman who was stationed at Camp Roberts in Southern California, he'd be well trained on how to handle difficult situations. Sure, it is true that he was still only 21 years old and so maybe didn't have the life experience some of his peers may have had, but that didn't mean he wasn't someone ahead of the curve for most people his age. And it certainly didn't mean he wasn't someone with the common sense required to take care of his 20-year-old wife and his 5-month-old son, as to him they were more important than anything else. That was why, after carefully weighing the pros and cons, he decided he could manage the drive to Pocatello, Idaho after he first picked up Jennifer and Clayton where they were staying with another family member in Castro Valley at the time. Once that was done, the plan was for it to be a simple and careful drive up to Idaho with no major problems along the way. But of course, isn't that always the plan? Sadly though, given the weather conditions, it wouldn't be long before problems arose anyway, as after heading east toward Donner Pass in the Sierra Nevadas, the Stolpas found out that Interstate 80 had been closed due to heavy snowfall. So, having to improvise, James made the decision to take a detour and head north on Interstate 5 towards Redding instead, only for him to find additional problems there as more deep snow meant those roads were closed too. Of course, at that point, he could have chosen to abandon the journey and return back home, but they'd come this far now and he really didn't want to miss his grandmother's funeral. That was exactly why he chose to continue on, with his new route seeing the Stolpas turn east onto Highway 299, all in the hopes that they'd be able to use it to reconnect to Interstate 80 via Nevada Route 140 a little further along the road. That plan didn't go too terribly initially. In fact, using that route, they were able to make it all the way through the small community of Villa, Nevada, about 150 miles or 240 kilometers north of Reno, and from there onto Washoe County Road 8A. The only problem, though, was that route was a little used country road cutting through a remote region of high desert and rugged mountains in the far northwest corner of Nevada, and so it wasn't best set up for the extreme elements the area was undergoing at the time. The road was actually so antiquated there was a running joke amongst old-timers who lived in the area that it may not represent the end of the world, but you could at least see it from there. As the Stolpas traveled further up that road, things became more and more difficult to navigate. At one point, a combination of snowdrifts and continued poor weather reduced their visibility to near zero. Still, even in spite of that, James felt confident he could make it through and back out onto Interstate 80. After all, it wasn't as if they could exactly stop where they were, so he pushed on. But unfortunately that proved to be his undoing, as sometime after dark his Dodge Dakota got bogged down in deep snow, leaving them unable to move any further. What made their situation even more dangerous was that they were off the main path, so it was far less likely anyone would drive by and find them. Yes, it's usually recommended during winter storms. Travelers in the Intermountain West stick to main highways where help is nearby if needed, and under normal circumstances James would have surely done just that. But given the series of events that had taken place, both he and his family now found themselves in a very dire situation. So dire that their lives were now at serious risk. But not wanting to panic, if only for his wife and child's sake, the Marine private tried his best to remain hopeful about the situation. Sure, they were stranded and in desperate need of rescue, but at least they had some supplies that could keep them going for a little while. It wasn't much, as their food rations were limited to a holiday fruitcake, a bag of corn chips, some coconut cookies, and a jar of prenatal vitamins. That said, if by chance they were discovered quickly, then that might be enough. Unfortunately though, as would soon become apparent, no one was going to find them quickly. With the wind constantly driving sub-zero air right through the gaskets of their truck's doors, staying warm also became a concern, particularly for baby Clayton. Of course, had this happened even a decade later, then they would have had a cell phone with them, but with it still being 1993, that would be science fiction for them. It was also just as uncommon to have GPS in your car either in order to pinpoint your exact location. Realizing they were going to have to take matters into their own hands, after 4 long days huddled inside their truck under increasingly poor conditions, the young couple decided the best thing to do was to venture outside in search of help. Before they did so, however, they'd have to bundle up by wearing extra pairs of socks and by putting on layers of Jennifer's spare nylon stockings, as James had no long johns with him, and nothing to wear on his feet other than a pair of sneakers. When it came to 5-month-old Clayton, given his age and level of vulnerability, he'd have to be very carefully sheltered from the elements. Luckily then, the pair were able to wrap him up in 2 sleeping bags, a small baby's one inserted into a larger adult one, which provided a decent enough cocoon of warmth for the youngster. Even that would still put them at risk of freezing to death, but it was the best they could do under the circumstances and the only real option they had left. So, once they were all ready to go, James left a note on the dashboard of his truck for any potential rescuers who might stumble upon it. A note that read, quote, "To our potential rescuers, if we're already dead, don't mind the rest of this letter. But if we are nowhere to be found, we have started walking to 140 as it appears the closest place to find help. Sincerely, the Stolpa family. P.S. Our final destination is Denio. P.P.S. We are carrying with us a 5-month-old baby. Help." After that was written out, the family of 3 headed into the freezing cold snow in the desperate hope they'd be able to find salvation before the situation got too bad. Unfortunately though, after trudging through 12 miles of road and rugged wilderness containing a continuous stream of waist-deep drifts, they realized there was nothing to be found in that direction. Obviously, demoralized by that, the young couple began to wonder if they hadn't made a huge mistake by leaving their truck. But by that point it was too late to go back. So instead they picked another direction and continued on that path for a further 28 hours, after which Jennifer became too exhausted to walk anymore. After walking for days until they were too tired to continue, they fortunately wouldn't be forced to remain out in the snow for much longer. After a brief search of their immediate surroundings, James was able to spot a small, shallow cave in the side of a cliff that had been initially hidden from view by a bush. Once he realized that was there, he immediately corralled Jennifer and Clayton over to it and built a small fire using pieces of sagebrush and paper from his son's diaper bag. Not that the fire would last long. No, pretty quickly it went out, leaving the family to spend the remainder of the night out in the cold. On the bright side, at least they now had some shelter from the wind and the snow, and as it turned out, that was enough to see them make it to morning with their lives still intact. But even if they had survived against all odds, morning only brought a whole new host of new problems with it as, realizing they were still in serious danger and had no idea where help may lie, the Stolpas still had to figure out a way to get to safety. That was why James decided to leave his wife and child behind in the cave with the remaining food while he went out into the elements once more in hopes of finding rescue. Of course, finding any help on that day would prove to be just as difficult as it was the day before, so for the next 18 hours he struggled through extreme snow and cold, never coming across anything useful along the way. There were no people, no vehicles, no signs of civilization at all. The only other life he came across, in fact, were the howling coyotes that slowly stalked him throughout, each of them just waiting for the chance to pounce. Still, even if things seemed utterly hopeless, the new father kept pushing forward anyway because he knew if he didn't, he was also sentencing his family to death alone in that cave. And it's just as well that he did continue because by nightfall of that evening, he'd have managed to make it back to his pickup truck where he could at least take shelter for the night and prepare for another trek out into the snow the following morning. Meanwhile, as that was going on, back in the cave, Jennifer and baby Clayton were going through struggles of their own as by now the limited stash of food they had was running desperately low. As if that wasn't bad enough, her supply of breast milk was also just about done too, meaning the only method she had of feeding her son after a certain point was to melt ice in her mouth and then transfer it to him like he was a baby bird. Obviously then, while the potential of freezing to death was still a major issue, the main concern at that time became starvation, something that was only emphasized in the young mother's mind when she also started hearing the sounds of howling coyotes off in the distance, presumably just waiting for the opportunity to pick the bones of her corpse. In the end, she needn't have worried about either of those eventualities because against all odds, rescue would soon come. How would that happen? Well, back at the Stolpas' marooned Dodge Dakota, James had woken up the next morning and from there followed the truck's tire tracks west all the way towards the remote ghost town of Nevada. Once there, he managed to push on a further 30 hours covering more than 40 miles of land that reached low temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit or -22 degrees Celsius, all while taking in no food or water. Clearly that was a near miraculous feat, but humans have been known to do incredible things when their lives are on the line, and the young father was able to continually will himself on throughout his entire ordeal by repeating the same mantra to himself whenever he felt he could go no further. He said, quote, "I have to make it. I have to make it so they can make it." Increasing howls from coyotes in the area were a growing concern for him, and the constant need for catnaps just so he had the energy to go on made progress a little slower than he would have liked. 2 days after he said a tearful goodbye to his wife, James was spotted stumbling along the road by David Peterson, a Washoe County road maintenance worker who immediately recognized that something serious was going on and so he stopped to provide aid. Of course, he didn't realize just how bad things were until he reached this seriously injured man, as upon closer inspection, it became apparent he was suffering from both frostbite and severe exhaustion. That said, James remained aware enough of himself and his surroundings to explain what had happened and also tell David that his wife and child were still out there somewhere. Realizing time was of the essence if they wanted to find them in this weather, the maintenance worker wasted no time getting James up into his truck, then driving him over to his house where his wife Ruth tried to thaw the freezing man's feet with a hairdryer. While she was doing that, David was calling for help as a woman and child were still out there alone somewhere in the wilderness. Obviously then, it didn't take long for aid to arrive after that as, with the help of James guiding them, a team of 3 rescuers, including David Peterson, journeyed back out into the snow in the hopes of carrying out a rescue before it was too late. Thankfully, after a full day of searching, they were finally able to locate the cave where Jennifer and Clayton were hiding out, much to her delight, of course. As another rescuer, Dusty Ferguson, later put it, quote, "I reached down and she gave me the baby. Then she gave me a big hug and said, 'Thank God you found me.'" Yes, despite it looking like all hope was lost for a while, the Stolpas had made it out of the entire situation with their lives intact. Not that they were without injury, though. No, both had suffered the effects of frostbite and would require a combination of surgery and whirlpool bath treatments at Reno's WashU Medical Center in order to try and save their toes from being amputated. Still, even with that possibility looming, they remained in good spirits regardless, safe in the knowledge that at the very least the worst of their ordeal was over. As dozens of reporters and photographers began swarming the scene, all in hopes of getting a comment from the family, they were able to start properly reflecting on what they had gone through and how lucky they were to be alive. The decision to go off the beaten path in such extreme weather conditions had been a poor one, and it had almost cost them the ultimate price. Still, everything they'd done after that had been the correct move, particularly James's insistence on going out alone to find rescue while Jennifer and Clayton had stayed behind in that cave. As she later put it herself, quote, "He is more than a hero to me. I don't think I could have picked anyone better. He had the courage and the drive to get us out of there. He promised me he would, and he did. He'll always be my hero." It seemed she wasn't the only one who felt her husband's actions had been incredibly heroic, because while the Stolpas were still recuperating in the hospital, offers were already starting to come in asking them to sell the rights to their story so it could be made into a book or a film. One estimate from an entertainment industry insider even suggested they could earn between $100,000 and $200,000 from the whole thing depending on how many different people were involved in a bidding war. That all ultimately led to the rights being signed away and a TV movie being released in 1994 named Snowbound, the Jim and Jennifer Stolpa story, with it starring Neil Patrick Harris and Kelly Williams as James and Jennifer respectively. But what has become of the Stolpas in the decades since? How do they feel about their ordeal today? Well, as it happens, some insight was shed into that when in December of 2013, another family underwent a similar situation, and it forced them to relive the whole thing all over again. As James would tell reporters when questioned about the similarities between the two stories, quote, "When I first saw the story, I thought to myself, oh boy, I know what they're going through. I'm not going to lie and say I don't think about what happened to us every day, but when I see something like that, I focus on it more. Having gone through it, I know exactly what they're feeling. The sense of helplessness and frustration and fear and all those things." It seems the ongoing stress of dealing with what happened had some pretty major ramifications for the family, as in 2006, James and Jennifer would sadly get divorced. Still, at least Clayton seems to have gotten out of the situation without any real emotional scars, with his mother stating that he's since enrolled in college and didn't feel traumatized in any way over the incident. So at least there's a silver lining to the whole situation, even if it's only a small one. While that's certainly a good thing, it remains troubling that such occurrences of people getting stranded in the snow are still taking place to this day. We can only hope that if and when it happens again, the victims will be as lucky as the Stolpas were, because had things gone just a little differently back in 1992, we might be talking about them with a more somber tone today. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.